Hello friends, in this video I will talk about how to answer and ace behavioral interview questions. There is a certain formula and art to answering and acing behavioral interview questions, and that is what I will talk about in this video. So what I will cover is what are behavioral interview questions, why are they asked, so what is the interviewer looking for when they are asking these questions, then how do you go about responding to these questions, and lastly some tips in order to ace those behavioral interview questions. So let's get going to understand how you can ace them. Now, what are behavioral interview questions? These are questions that are asked of you where you are required to share an example where you demonstrated a certain soft skill in your past experience. And these questions usually sound like, tell me about a time, describe a situation, have you ever been in a situation and where or how would you handle a particular situation, or can you provide me an example regarding XYZ? Here, you're required to share a real life example from your past experience where you demonstrated that particular skill that you are being asked about. Now, one call out, these questions may also be role dependent. So for instance, if you are being hired for an HR role, then there would be more behavioral questions that you are asked with regards to people management and conflict management and so on and so forth. Similarly, if it's a leadership role, there would be more behavioral questions that you are asked with regards to leadership examples from your past experience. Now, let me give you some examples of the type of questions you should expect to be asked. Tell me about your greatest professional achievement. Now, this is a question where you are being asked about your leadership skills. Give me an example of a time when you had to adapt to change. This is an example where you need to share an example with regards to change management. Tell me about a time when you dealt with failure. Now, this is something about what you learned. And when you learned something, how did you get better at that particular thing that you learned? Have you ever had to resolve a major workplace conflict? This is all about people management. Describe a time when you had to handle a difficult situation. This is about leadership, but could also be about people management or related to some organization of project or project management per se. Tell me about a time when written communication skills made a difference. This is about communication skills. Describe a situation where you successfully motivated someone. This is about people skills. So when they're asking this question, they're looking for your people skills. Give an example of a time where you had to prioritize multiple projects. Now, this is an example with regards to your organizational skills or project management skills. Describe a time when you acted like a leader. Very clear about your leadership skills. Tell me about a time when your critical skills came in handy. This is about analytical skills. So when these questions are being asked, they won't specifically go ahead and ask you about tell me a leadership example or give me a leadership example or an analytical example. They'll always go like, tell me about a time when you assessed certain data or information and you came up with insights. What did you find and how did you go about it? Now, this is all about analytical skills. Tell me about a time when there was a conflict with someone and how did you go about managing the conflict? This is all about people skills. So when you ask this question, you also need to reflect in your brain what is exactly that they are looking for, what key skill they want me to present here, and hence I pick an example from my past where I can talk about that skill. Now, why is the interviewer asking you behavioral questions? One, they want to understand whether that particular situation has been encountered by you in past and you've experienced it and have some idea of how to deal with it. Second, they want to understand what kind of a person you are, so kind of judging your personality. And third, they would like to also know and understand that when you are presented with a similar situation in future, how would you go about dealing with it and how would you go about managing that particular situation as and when it arises. Now, what is the formula in order to respond to behavioral interview questions? The formula that is most famously used and successfully used is called the CAR model, where C stands for context, A stands for action, and R stands for result. Context is all about what happened, where did it happen, why did it happen, with who did it happen. So giving the background so that interviewer understand what was the context of the situation in which you were in. A is for action. So how did you respond? What skill did you use? How did you intervene? And how did you resolve the situation? So all about you. And this is the most important part. While context is also important because you need to make sure that the interviewer is on the same page as you and they understand the situation very clearly, but so is action, where action is not about them understanding clearly, but action is all about you telling them that you were able to master that particular situation and came as a hero and solved everything. And third is result. This is not so important, but still important for you to mention, because here you just need to mention that after all that you did, the results were very successful and they were green and they were positive. Obviously, they will always be positive and green, and hence I mean to say you don't really need to talk too much about the results. You can just say the results were positive, you delivered growth, or there came success in the project, and hence the results were positive. But make sure that you help the interviewer understand the entire context, because if they don't understand the context, anything that else you will talk about is all French to them. Second, the action piece. This part is important because this is where you present yourself. And thirdly, just mention that the results were all positive, good, and maybe throw in some numbers with regards to how was the growth, whether it doubled or increased or whatever that you were trying to achieve, what was achieved. The key reason for using this model is to make sure that you demonstrate to the interviewer that you have experience handling the situation, have acted accordingly, and got great results, versus just trying to tell them a hypothetical situation where you would behave and how you would behave in a particular situation. In this way, you kind of give them a context, a storyline, and then your action, and then what were the results. So you give them a thread explaining them how you demonstrated that particular skill, as against just saying that yes, you know and you know how to handle it and you can do it. You rather need to explain how you did it in past, so they have reassurance that you can always manage such a situation when and if it comes in future. Now, tip number 1 is related to how do you prepare for behavioral questions. Always start with preparing your examples from your work experience first, as against preparing for the questions you expect to be asked, because there might be questions which are all similar. Tell me about a time when you showed leadership, tell me about a time when you solved an issue, tell me about a time when there was a challenge and you were able to understand the challenge and solve for the challenge, and so on and so forth. Now, these all questions are leadership questions. So as against trying to answer or trying to understand all the questions that you could be expected to ask and then trying to come up with an answer for each of the question, start by thinking about your top 5 to 8 examples from your past. Things that you're really proud about, things that you really rock at, and you are like, if someone asks me about these things, I can speak with passion and I can explain what I did and how I did, and I really rocked at that particular experience. Hence, always start with that, because in that case, whatever question you are asked, it is very easy for you to draw down from the list of those 5 to 8 examples and say, okay, this question is pertaining to leadership because he's talking about how I solved a particular challenge. And I have an example which is about leadership. So you can pick up that example from leadership and just throw that example in order to answer that particular question. Similarly, if you're asked a question about people, skills, conflict, how did you manage people? If people were not motivated, how did you motivate them? In your examples, if there is an example where you also showed leadership, but there is an also element where you did people management and you motivated people and you supported people, while it may seem like a leadership example, you can always pick that example up, change it a bit, just make or sound it like or highlight the parts where you managed people. So for instance, if there is an example or a question about, tell me about a time when you motivated people. Now you have an example about in your mind about leadership where there was an issue with the results that the company was seeing and results were down, and you managed to help the team come up with the ideas and analyze data and information in order for them to be able to solve that issue, and hence the results started to get better and the growth started to come. Now this is a leadership example, and if a leadership question comes, you can always share this example. But if there's a question pertaining to people management and motivating people, you can always talk about how people were demotivated because the results were down, and when you sat with them, you tried to understand why they are demotivated, and then you tried to show them the vision that this is what we want to achieve and this is how we will do it, and you kind of motivated them and excited them about the vision, and then everyone was engaged into achieving that vision and you ended up delivering the success. Now the idea is you always start with examples. So I have these 5-8 examples listed in my head, and it's also easy to remember all these examples, right? As against trying to remember each of the questions and answers for those questions, it's easy to memorize those 5 to 8 examples, and for that matter you don't even need to memorize them because you really did them. They are from your past experience, so you can speak at length about them. You just need to memorize the name of those projects, and then you can simply draw down from them, twist them a bit, and answer the behavioral question that you are being asked. Second tip is try as much as possible to stick with the examples from your professional experience as against personal experience. Now, I understand there might be instances where this is your first job interview. By the way, if that is the case, I have a separate video on how you should go about addressing or acing an interview, which is your kind of first interview, or you have not had previous job experience and this is the first time you're trying to get a job and there aren't much examples from your professional life. How should you go about answering them? But in absence of that, if you have professional and personal experience, try to pick up examples from your professional experience first. And also note, professional experience just doesn't mean experience that you've gathered while doing a job. It could also be experience that you've gathered while you were doing some project in your university or college. Because the interviewer wants to know how you behave at work, because they are hiring you for work. We behave differently at work, and there are times when we behave differently at home or in our personal life. And they are interested in knowing how do you behave or perform at work. And hence it's important that when you have a choice between two examples, try to pick the professional example over the personal example. Unless or until, as I said, you don't have any professional examples, then do check out this video that I have prepared exactly for this purpose. Third tip, when asked a behavioral question, make sure you gather your thoughts first before answering. By gathering your thoughts, what I mean is first you need to understand which skill is being asked about. Which skill is the interviewer inquiring me about? Is it leadership, people, conflict, whatever it is? And then once you've understood what the question is about, then you take time to see which example from your list fits in best. And the third part of gathering your thoughts is to make sure how you will explain or take them through that particular example. And the last tip is make sure when you are sharing an example from your professional experience, you tell a story and not just share facts. So for instance, when you are talking about the context of a project, don't just share facts like competitive activity was high and because of that we lost 10% share, and then I did analysis and the analysis gave this answer and we implemented the analysis and got the result. This is very boring. This is like someone giving you facts. And the person who's listening will not be able to remember this because these are very factual. It's like you're reading a history book, and if history book is all about dates and people's name and all, you won't remember all this. But when someone tells you the history book in form of a story on what happened and creating a story out of it and then taking you from one thread to another, that way you remember. And why is it important for the interviewer to remember what you said is while they would be taking notes, by the time they sit back and review the notes and decide which candidate to hire, they will look at all the notes and try to remember what these notes were, what was the interviewee saying, and hence based on that they'll try to form some story in their mind at that point in time. But if you've made it very easy for them, if you've given them the story, it would be very easy for them to go sit back and check out the notes that they've taken, and based on the bullets exactly remember, oh, this is what you were talking about, because they remember the story, they don't remember the facts. So it's important for you to tell a story. Also, stories are interesting, right? So when you share a story, you make the interviewer kind of like you and they're interested and they want to listen more. So similarly, you can talk about how there was a business which started to tank, and the tanking happened just because competition started extra activity, spending more money, and because of that shared loss, our GM was taken by surprise, or our team was taken by surprise. Now let me share an example on how to tell a story. And this example is from my time in Procter & Gamble when I was the finance head for hair care business. India became part of our region. In order for India to become part of our region, we also had to do taking over. So we flew to India to take over the business. By taking over, I mean we wanted to understand the business, the dynamics of the business, what are the core fundamentals on the business, so we can take over the business and run it from there. When we flew to India and when the team presented the India business to us, we realized that the India hair care business has not been growing for past 4 to 5 years. While at the same time looking at the numbers and looking at the fact sheets, our team realized that all other categories were growing in India. And India is a growth market, right? So baby care was growing, fem care was growing, colorants were growing, and other key businesses that Procter & Gamble handled were growing good, except for hair care for past 5 years. And we were like, okay, this is an important challenge to understand. So our GM gave us a task that we need to understand why there is not been growth in India for past 5 years and how we can turn around this growth, what is required. And So what we did was we created a team, and I was the leader of the team, and the job of the team was to understand what was going on. So what I did was I brought the entire multifunctional team in a room, booked them for a day to understand what is our vision and where are we today and how do we go to that vision, which is to the growth vision. Now, just hold on from the story. You understand what I'm trying to do. I talked about how we flew to India, how the people were presenting to us and they were talking to us about the business, and we realized the business is not growing. So this is a story I'm telling versus just saying, I took over India, India was not growing, and hence we wanted to grow India. But this is boring, I'm not sharing facts. And now we all sat together in a room. So the interviewer can picture you sitting in the room and the team talking about it. So coming back to the story, so what happened was we gathered all the data and tried to understand what is causing us not to grow in past 5 years. What was true before that when we were growing, and what changed in those 5 years for us to know exactly what has stalled the growth. And this way we were able to identify 1, 2, or 3 issues which had stalled the growth. And then we started talking about how do we solve those issues, and so on and so forth. So the idea is, when you're telling this story, people coming, sitting in the room, you analyzing data, you bringing them together, you're talking about the vision, how do we go there. This is all storytelling, and the person who's listening to the story starts to relate, and they can even find themselves as part of the story somewhere. And this is when they start to enjoy, they remember what you're telling, and eventually your answer will be a great answer, just because it wasn't a good answer, but it was also told in a very smart, nice way, which they can remember and relate to. Hopefully this video was helpful for you to be now able to ace any behavioral interview or any behavioral interview question. Thank you for watching.